Sheffield Junction by Mike Adams. Sheffield Junction was the intersection of the Tynesta Valley and Pittsburgh and Western Railroads. It was located in the north of Forest County, Pennsylvania. Forest County is in northwest Pennsylvania. This junction existed between approximately 1882 until 1941, when the Tynesta Valley ceased operations. The Tynesta Valley Railroad extended from Sheffield in the north to Halton in the south. The Tynesta Valley was narrow gauge, that is 36 inches between the rails, and after 1911 the Pittsburgh and Western was converted to standard gauge at 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. These are pictures of the Sheffield Junction diamond. The Pittsburgh and Western became northern sub of the B&O. This is a meet at Sheffield Junction of locomotives from the Tynesta Valley Railroad to the right and a B&O locomotive on the left. Photo of circa 1930. The Tynesta Valley locomotive is heading south to Halton. Halton, originally called Spring Creek, was a small town in the Clarion River Valley and was the southern terminus of the Tynesta Valley Railroad. Halton was home to a sawmill and wood chemical plant. Halton was a rallying point for raftsmen during the rafting era of logging. The sawmill closed in 1908, but the Clawson chemical plant stayed open until 1948. Material for this video comes almost exclusively from Wayne Cole's book, Ghost Rails VIII, which is about the B&O Northern Sub. Sheffield Junction geography. The Pittsburgh and Western built a station at Sheffield Junction, and the Tynesta Valley paid a rental fee. It was 14 miles from Sheffield Junction to Sheffield on the Tynesta Valley through Brookston, with 17 miles to Halton, with 65 miles to Foxburg on the P&W through Marionville, Marionville being 17.1 miles from the junction. Going north on the northern sub, Kane was about 18 miles and Mount Jewett was 25.7 miles. Passenger and mixed freight. Both the Tynesta Valley and P&W had passenger service up through 1937. In this picture, a mixed train with a passenger baggage car follows a trainload of chemical wood bound for Halton. Next, a Tynesta Valley passenger train is northbound for Sheffield. Finally, this is the last narrow-gauge P&W passenger train leaving Marionville. It is 1911. The train is bound for Kane through Sheffield Junction. Looking west. This is a key view of Sheffield Junction looking west down the Tynesta Valley tracks. The Tynesta Valley tracks turn south to intersect the B&O to Kane. At this point, the Tynesta Valley and the B&O are running parallel. This remarkable photo is from the late 1930s. The east leg of the Y is seen to the right. This is a Tynesta Valley chemical wood train heading south to Halton. Last run. This is the last run across the Sheffield Junction diamond by the Tynesta Valley Railroad. Old Mogul number 10 is carrying a load of chemical wood to Halton. At this time, the TWA, the Tynesta Valley Railroad, is narrow gauge, that is 36 inches between the rails, and the Baltimore and Ohio is standard gauge, which is 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. This meant that cars could no longer be exchanged between the two railroads. However, passengers could transfer to the Tynesta Valley and vice versa. Note the balloon stack used in dry months to prevent forest fires. Sheffield Sawmill. The turning point for Sheffield Junction came as early as 1907, when the Central Pennsylvania Lumber Company built a large sawmill at Sheffield. B&O conversion to standard gauge. Here is a picture of the Lucinda crew that converted the B&O to standard gauge in 1911. Notice the wider ties are already in place. This is a picture of the last gauge. This is a picture of the last narrow gauge passenger train through Marionville, which went through Sheffield Junction on the way to Kane. Loleta. The sawmill at Loleta was a major destination of the Tynesta Valley Railroad. At this point, I have merged this video with one that I've done earlier on Loleta. This video is a study of the fascinating history of the Loleta recreational area. I am Mike Adams. Loleta is now a beautiful recreational park maintained by the National Forest Service. Located 6 miles south of Marionville, Pennsylvania, it is on the southeast corner of the Allegheny National Forest. It is well supplied with picnic tables, outdoor fireplaces, campgrounds, and hiking trails. A dam on the east branch of Millstone Creek forms a swimming pool. There's nothing visible to remind us that Loleta was once a bustling lumber town. But Loleta was once a roaring lumber camp operating between 1898 and 1913. The Tynesta Valley Railroad built a branch to Loleta in 1898. This branch line is just one example of branches built to connect the Tynesta Valley with any one of a number of profitable logging camps of that time. The Tynesta Valley Railroad was so named because it passed through the valley of Tynesta Creek. It connected Loleta with the lumber mill and Pennsylvania Railroad main line in Sheffield. There were trains that carried finished lumber and trains that hauled logs to be cut. Loleta locomotives and log loaders. Some of the locomotives on the Tynesta Valley Railroad, which ran through Loleta, were conventional steam locomotives using dry rods to propel the wheels. But others used a radical new design that came along as late as the 1880s. These were gear-driven and had a different alignment of the cylinders. Locomotives with the new design were tailor-made to operate on the hastily built, uneven tracks used for logging. There were 3 different designs of gear-driven locomotives used on the Tynesta Valley Railway. One was called the Climax, and the second was called the Heisler. And there was a third kind of gear-driven locomotive called the Shay. These locomotives gave access to the remotest parts of the forest in the Allegheny Plateau. A key piece of equipment for Pennsylvania lumbering was the log loader. These were steam-driven and placed on narrow-gauge trucks to allow moving from place to place. They were used to load logs on railroad cars. The log loaders greatly increased the efficiency of logging operations. The Loleta Lumber Camp was designed and built by the Amsler and Campbell Company and at one point had over 600 inhabitants. Here are the details of its development. Land was cleared in 1898 and a large sawmill was built. A town was laid out and buildings constructed to provide for the needs of a large workforce. The mill was completed in early 1899 and the mill began sawing lumber soon thereafter. A broom handle factory was added. By December, the town numbered 29 dwellings, 2 boarding houses, a schoolhouse, livery stable, ice house, a general store, blacksmith shop, and post office. Here is the school in 1907. A dam had been built on the east branch of Millstone Creek to form a large mill pond heated by steam from the mill. The log pond was much bigger than the swimming area that now exists. Amsler and Campbell purchased a Shay locomotive to handle the switching duties at Loleta. In May 1903, Loleta was bought by the Central Pennsylvania Lumber Company, who bought the mill, timberland, logging railroads, and locomotives. After this time, more of the logs were shipped over the Tionesta Valley Railway to the large mill in Sheffield. Here, they could be cut into lumber more efficiently. In 1913, the lumber ran out and the Loleta logging camp was abandoned. The tragic result of the logging practices of the day was the devastating impact on the ecology of the forests. The land was stripped bare, totally ravaged. The loggers left an ugly, barren landscape devoid of trees. Most loggers implemented a cut-out and get-out philosophy. You can see that was true of the hillsides around Loleta, and it was true for nearly all of the deforested areas in the region. The logging industry leaders were capitalists with no restrictions. There were no regulations or enforcing agencies to prevent these practices. The mass deforestation caused uncontrolled wildfires, flooding, and erosion, all of which clogged the waterways with sediment and ash, severely limiting the forest's ability to regenerate itself. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, it became evident to the public that the forests were suffering from the destructive impact of widespread forest stripping, logging, and its effects. The reaction was an urgent realization that the forest and watersheds needed to be protected and managed. Something had to change, and it did. As a result of pivotal legislation and the efforts of key individuals, a miraculous recovery of our forests occurred. Dr. Joseph Rothrock was one of those key individuals. He was Pennsylvania's first forestry commissioner. Two of Rothrock's major accomplishments during his tenure as commissioner were his land acquisition program and the creation of a forest academy to train foresters for state service. Foresters were taught the principles of sustainable forestry. Another key individual was Gifford Pinchot. Gifford Pinchot became the first chief of the National Forest Service and later became the governor of Pennsylvania. Gifford Pinchot National Forest in Washington was named in his honor. A pivotal act of the federal government was the Weeks Act, signed into law by President William Howard Taft in 1911. The act was named for the congressman from Massachusetts, John Weeks, who initiated it. The Weeks Act was an interpretation of the U.S. Constitution which permitted the federal government to purchase private land in order to protect the headwaters of rivers and watersheds in the eastern United States. The bill called for fire protection efforts through federal, state, and private cooperation. An important provision of the Weeks Act was $9 million in funding to purchase private lands in the east to create our national forest. Some of the money was used to purchase land that would become the Allegheny National Forest. The Allegheny National Forest now covers more than 500,000 acres of land. The Allegheny National Forest was established in 1923. John Weeks went on to be a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts. Great Depression and the Civilian Conservation Corps. The Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC program, was created because so many young men were out of work during the Great Depression. The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world, lasting from 1929 till 1939. It began after the stock market crash of October 1929, which sent Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of investors. A third of all banks failed. Unemployment rose to 25%, and homelessness increased. Hundreds of thousands of young men were out of work. The Civilian Conservation Corps, also known as the CCC program, was a work relief program that gave hundreds of thousands of young men employment on environmental projects. These men were of 18 to 28 years of age, unemployed, and not married. Nationwide, the CCC planted more than 3 billion trees and constructed trails, bridges, campground facilities, and shelters in more than 800 parks. The CCC also built wildlife refuges, fish rearing facilities, water storage basins, and animal shelters. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, created the Civilian Conservation Corps with an executive order on April 5, 1933. The CCC was part of his New Deal legislation. 3 CCC camps near Marionville provided over 100 workers for the construction of Loleta. They are annotated on the map. They are Camp 1 at During, Camp 6 at Beaver Meadows, and Camp 9 at Salmon Creek. My father was at Camp 9. The Army had a great influence on the CCC camps. You could see it in the barracks made to house the men and the uniforms they wore. My father learned how to cook at the CCC Camp 9, a passion he carried into the Navy during World War II and on to running a successful restaurant, Jerry's Diner, in Marionville. The young men of the Civilian Conservation Corps worked real hard to build the Loleta recreation area. Here we see the early stages of construction. In this picture, the dam is being built. Notice a ditch has been dug to divert the waters of Millstone Creek. By now the lower dam is finished. There is high water evident here. Notice the tent used to feed the workers or act as the office for the director. In this one, the crew is cutting rock for the dam. Here's how the swimming area looks now. The CCC also built this rustic log bathhouse that people used to change their swimsuits. The efforts of the CCC at Loleta were honored in this sign. It reads, "This monument is dedicated to the Civilian Conservation Corps, 1933 to 1942, who provided forest fire protection, planted billions of trees, and built hundreds of recreation sites across the United States. Between 1933 and 1937, the CCC in the Allegheny National Forest constructed the bathhouse, dam, and picnic pavilions seen here at the Loleta Recreation Area. The campgrounds were added later." The history of Loleta is of personal interest to me. I grew up in Marionville in the 60s. I participated in a special summer program in which we rode a school bus to Loleta every afternoon to swim. I had no idea that Loleta was once a prosperous lumber town. There was no visible evidence to that effect. But I've since learned that Loleta went from being a thriving lumber town to a ghost town in less than 15 years. With the help of the Civilian Conservation Corps, the National Forest Service made Loleta into a wonderful recreation park. They built the swimming area that now remains. The swimming area has recently been reopened after a cleanup of accumulated sediment, wooden material, and organic material. Loleta has become accepted into the National Registry of Historic Places. With the continued excellent caretaking by the National Forest Service, it will continue to be an asset to the region for years to come. Here are the references used in this study. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.